They tend to say that history repeats itself, and this is particularly true when you look at what happened when the printing press arrived in 1453. Because up until then, the Catholic Church had held a monopoly on culture and knowledge. They had essentially been able to dictate what was true and what wasn't. You needed a permit to read the Bible. It was that bad. And all of a sudden came the printing press, and horse carts, entire carts of Bibles were just dumped on the streets of Paris. Well, chaos ensued. All of a sudden everybody can read, and there wasn't enough punishment to go about for everybody. The people in power tried to stop this, that all of a sudden the middle class could publish and talk about whatever ideas they liked. This was obviously very, very dangerous for society. They would publish novels, ideas, stories, things that made them happy. This was very dangerous. So all the kings across Europe cracked down on the printing press, which allowed copying of ideas, accurate and cheap spread of ideas. And it escalated until on January 13, 1735, France took the lead in stipulating the death penalty by hanging for unauthorized copying. It didn't work either. There's a parallel here to today. But what we learn from history is that powerful people will use their power to keep their power. And nothing is more powerful than the information advantage. If you have a bit of control about what culture and knowledge is out there in society, that is the most powerful situation any person can be in. The Catholic Church didn't need lawmakers, since they controlled what lawmakers knew, or believed for that matter. They could be absolutely sure that no law would ever go against their interests. That's why the spread of information is dangerous to people in power. And it's not the spread of information. That sounds like some abstract concept. But this is about people. This is about human beings. Human beings who have been empowered for the first time in their life to share ideas, to see something and spread and share that experience. Just like when the printing press arrived. And like when the printing press arrived, we see people in power cracking down on this. It's true that the net has enabled people to talk like never before, but it's also true that it's enabling a big brother society unlike anything we've ever seen. If you're listening to the ones and zeros leaving a particular computer, sounds extremely boring, doesn't it? But the laws about wiretapping are made for a world when wiretapping meant that you would listen in to conversations. You would listen to a phone call. And that was all the information you would get. If you're listening to the equivalent on a computer today, and the laws allow this because they have not been updated. If you're listening to what's going on a computer today, you can learn which newspapers a person is reading, which articles in that paper, how long, and in which order. You will learn which tickets they may be planning to buy, but not buying. You will learn their sexual preference based on what dating sites they're visiting. You will learn a lot about these individuals that you have never before been able to learn through wiretapping. Exposing what we do online exposes our entire identity in ways that have never, ever been wiretappable. So the concept of wiretapping has grown by magnitudes without the appropriate safeguards catching up. And that's a very, very serious problem on the European level, at the policy-making level. Just to take one solid example. If you're suspected of a crime, it's usually that the police can come and confiscate your computer and your mobile phone. A computer is treated, like we heard earlier today, like a tool. Essentially, it's regarded like a hammer or a wrench. But if somebody were to go through my computer, well, or at least try, since it's encrypted, well, assuming that they could, they would find lots and lots of things that are protected by law. Letters, photos, really private correspondence. But somehow, it's not protected just because it's on a computer. And here is the heart of the problem. The people who are making policy today, the people who are setting the tone for making policy, are in their 50s and 60s. They are not online the way we are. In fact, it's more dangerous than that. They are sending mails to one another and think they understand the net because they do that. The net reshapes our ways of communicating. We are social creatures, and it's reshaping the very way we interact with one another. There's a very hard line about 35 years of age. Above that age, when people have a problem, they will tend to go through their entire address book mentally, pick one person, and just one person, who may be able to help them with this problem, and then contact that person and that person alone, and wait for a couple of hours or maybe days for a response. How many in here do that? None. One, maybe. Two, maybe. Whereas the people below 35, whenever they identify a problem, word that problem as specifically as they can, broadcast it to their entire circle of friends, and know that a response will come from somewhere. They don't know from whom, they don't know from where, but they know that they'll get very helpful advice. This is how much the net is reshaping society. We've been communicating the same way for millions of years, and we're at a breaking point. This is how big it is. There are two groups, when you talk to sociologists, there are two groups trying to define just how big an impact the net has on society. One group says it's the biggest impact since the printing press, 500 years ago. The invention was the biggest impact. The second group disagrees with this and says it's the biggest impact since the advent of the written language 6,000 years ago. That's how interesting times we live in. So, wiretapping. Why care? Why should you care? If you have nothing to hide, do you have anything to fear? Really? You'll hear this argument. You've probably heard it a lot of times, and you'll hear it many times again. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. This argument is false, dishonest, and plain wrong. And I'm going to give you 4 reasons for that I want you to remember, even if somebody wakes you up in the middle of a lecture. The first, most obvious reason is that once wiretapping is in place, the rules can change. You might agree to wiretapping of your phones and new wiretapping abilities for the police for reasons that sound perfectly well when you agree to them. But the rules can and do change. Tomorrow, this wiretapping will be used to enforce things that you may not agree with, and by then you don't have a choice. This is the most obvious of 4 reasons. The second is a little bit more elusive, and that is that it leads to self-censorship. If you know that you're being listened into, you will keep quiet about some things that you would have said otherwise. This is easy to observe, that we tend to say things in confidence to just a close circle of friends. And it's that's farther than that. This is now a governmental tracking device. With the Data Retention Directive on the European level, which fortunately being reviewed and probably quite hammered, every movement that this phone makes is being recorded, registered and stored for at least 6 months. In many countries in Europe, prostitution is questionable, if not outright illegal. If I were to go to such a country and stop at the particular street known for that activity, because my grandmother happened to live there, and helped her with her weekly groceries, people who were looking at my movement data would draw entirely different conclusions of what I did there on a Friday night. And the thing here isn't that my grandmother lives in a strange place. The thing is that you stop thinking about if you have anything to hide and start thinking about how can my movements be interpreted by somebody with bad intent, even if I am being honest. You start thinking about how not to get red flagged in the system. And that's when you get a silent country. That's when you get a fearful country with people who are afraid of deviating. We saw this in the former Eastern Bloc. It also kills entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship, by definition, is deviating from the norm and not accepting the status quo. But there's more to it than this. If you don't have anything to hide, you don't have anything to fear. Well, I do have something to hide. It's a very deep psychological need to have something to myself. And this is most easily observed by the fact that I lock the door when I go to the bathroom. I think most of us do that. I want to do that because I want to have something to myself. Even though nothing particularly strange or unusual takes place, I still want to have it to myself. And trying to stick some sort of criminal intent on me just because I demand to have some things to myself is a very dishonest way of arguing. And fourth, and most importantly, the reason to have privacy is that a society without privacy will stop dead in its technological and cultural advancement. Just 9 years ago, homosexuality was illegal in many states in Europe. In Sweden in particular, since that's where I come from, and I'm most familiar with that country's laws. That meant if you were born with a homosexual orientation, you were born a criminal. By definition, you were a criminal. And if today's wiretapping and surveillance laws had been in place in 1920, this would still be the case. Because we are now at a point where we are tracking the association of every person, with the intent of just rounding up criminals. Well, they're just criminals. It's just criminals. What do you care? Well, maybe I do care. Maybe I think there's something bigger at stake here. These people would not have been able to contact one another and say, hey, is it really right that we are treated this way? They would not have been able to form an organization fighting for their rights, and they would not have gotten those rights. It is in society's interest that people can question the system. So what we're fighting for isn't really that much of rocket science. We're fighting for the same laws to apply online as they do offline. The net is currently a lawless Wild West, and that's a huge problem. When I'm writing a letter to somebody in paper, an analog paper letter, I choose if I identify myself. On the envelope, on the back of the envelope, on the letter, on both, or not at all. And that's my choice. Nobody can make that not my choice. And what we demand is for the same laws to apply online as they do offline. We're demanding